Hello, friends. I hope you're doing wonderful. We will examine 10 more questions to learn little more of our country's system of governance. And like always, don't forget the additional parallel learning through the images on the screen. You might be aware about the concept of the unicorn in the startup world. We will see today India's decacorns, and there are five of them. All right, let's take the first question. It says, which of the following statements are correct regarding the conventions for conducting the election to the offices of President and the Vice President of India? First statement, for the election of the President, the Secretary General of Lok Sabha or the Secretary General Rajya Sabha is appointed in rotation as the returning officer. And similarly, it is saying for the Vice President election, Secretary General Rajya Sabha is appointed as the returning officer. Very poor performance, and it looks like this idea is not known to people. So it is the Election Commission of India who appoints the returning officer in all the elections, basically. And yes, by convention, for both the houses, it is the Secretary General of Lok Sabha and the Secretary General of Rajya Sabha by rotation. So, for example, in the 2022 election of the president, it was the Secretary General of Rajya Sabha who was appointed last time. So, you will see next year, 2027, it will be the Secretary General of Lok Sabha whose turn will come up. And similarly, in the last vice presidential election that took place in 2025, it was the Secretary General of Rajya Sabha, again, who was the returning officer. So, anyway, only the first option is correct here. And we take the next question now. Which of the following statements are correct regarding the president and the vice president elections? So it says the nomination paper of the candidate for president shall be subscribed by at least 50 electors and as proposers and 50 electors as seconders. And for the vice president, it is saying the nomination paper shall be subscribed by at least 25 proposers and 25 seconders. Now, this is a provision of the Presidential and Vice Presidential Elections Act of the year 1952. And it says that for the president, it shall be 50 proposers and 50 seconders. And for the vice president, it says 20 proposers and 20 seconders. So actually, the second statement is wrong on that ground. Now, see, the idea behind all this proposer and seconder is to attract serious candidates only. As earlier, many people used to file nominations just to get the publicity, and they will not receive even one vote. So every election requires a nomination of the candidates. Every election, which is done by one of the voters. Like in Lok Sabha, it can be the registered voter of the constituency. And for the president, it can be one of the members of the electoral college of the president. Then after the nomination, it is to be supported by other members of the electoral college. So they are termed as seconders. They have to be unique voters and cannot be proposer or seconder for other candidates in the same election. And they may not vote for the same candidate who they have proposed during the election. It is anyway secret ballot, so we will never know. So it is just the procedure that has been designed that way. Fine. So the next question we have is which of the following statements are correct regarding the recently submitted report of the 16th Finance Commission. So in this year's budget, as you know, this also was submitted, and this 16th Finance Commission has made the recommendation for the period 2026 to 2031. Because the previous one had given one special recommendation in between during the COVID year. So that was 2021. And then 5 years, so made it to 26. Otherwise, till then, it was always, proper, rounded off half decade. So 2025 should have been the year, but this is 2026 because COVID was a special year in between. Anyway, so now it says states' share in the divisible pool of union taxes is recommended at 41%. That is correct, and they have kept it the same as the 15th Finance Commission only. and it has introduced a new criteria for horizontal devolution, that means between center and the states, of the diesel pool among the states, that is contribution to GDP. Actually, this is also correct thing. This is the first time this kind of an idea has been introduced, and it has not recommended any revenue deficit grants to any of the states. So this is also correct. This is the first finance commission where no revenue deficit grants have been recommended. Even earlier when they were recommended, like if you see the 15th finance commission, please you can check, but they will be hardly 3 to 4 states only, because gradually most states were not having revenue deficits, so which is a good progress for our country. So now nobody has revenue deficit, so no revenue deficit grant they have recommended also. So all three statements are correct. Now, this contribution of GDP, as we said, is the first time it has been introduced. And if you are not sure, these are all the criteria that have been used. So population at 17.5%. So they have increased this. Last time this used to be 15%. And demographic performance actually has been reduced from 12.5%. So total, if you see for population, it is still the same, but they have increased for population and reduced for the demographic performance, which earlier was called total fertility rate. So right now also they're looking at the change in the fertility rates only. So this contribution to GDP is a totally new criteria. However, they have also dropped some criteria from previous years. And this is basically the contribution of the state's GDP in the total state's GDP of the country. So based on that, they have their mathematical calculations to use that. Okay. So, since this is something which has happened in the recent times, you may want to make sure that you have got all the basic information, prelims, mains, both. Finance Commission is an important topic. Then the next question is which of the following statements are correct regarding the president's address to both houses of parliament assembled together during the first session of the parliament every year? So it says no other business is transacted by the houses of the parliament until the president has addressed both the houses. That is correct. And we all know that the first session every year, the first sitting itself is the president's address. So, as part of the procedures, there is no other work undertaken by the House unless the president has actually addressed. So, that happens on the first day. Then the sitting is presided by the Speaker of the Lok Sabha. Now, that is wrong. See, it will be presided by the president herself. And that shall be very logical to our mind also, that how can anybody else preside when the president herself is in the meeting? In fact, there is a special chair which is brought only for this visit of the president, and otherwise nobody else sits on that chair. So, quite a poor performance. We really need to up the game, because these are some simple parts of the procedure of our parliament. Anyway, the next question is about the recently introduced VBG Ramji Bill, Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika Mission, which is basically a modified version, a replacement, little enhanced version of what earlier used to be the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. So it is a scheme administered by which of the following in the government of India? Random, options I created: Prime Minister's office, and thing, Panchayati Raj, skill development. It's all rural development. In fact, earlier the name was more clear also: National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. So it is the Ministry of Rural Development who does this work, who manages this scheme. Then for the next 5 questions, I had put up just a random annual financial statement of the government with some simple numbers for ease of calculation. And I had left out 5 entries to be filled based on the information given. So, over the last some time, UPSC loves to ask a very clear cut understanding of these things. Theoretically, everybody knows, but when it comes to actually knowing and doing these practically, it becomes a little difficult. So let's wrap it up now. See, first, A, that is total receipts. Total receipts is simply the revenue receipts plus the capital receipts. revenue receipts plus capital receipts. That will be the total receipts. So revenue receipt is 1000 and capital receipt is 700. So that makes it 1700. Similarly, total expenditure. Total expenditure will also be the revenue expenditure, which if you see is 1250 plus the capital expenditure, which is 450. In fact, even if you don't want to do this calculation, 1250 plus 450, that is 1700. As you can see, they have to be equal. If the budget has to be balanced, then their total receipts and total expenditure must be equal. It cannot be disbalanced. So that's a balanced budget. It has to be equal only. So if I was you, I'll just simply say if A is 1700, B has to be 1700. Then revenue deficit. Now, revenue deficit, as the name itself says, it will be the revenue expenditure minus the revenue receipt of the government. So revenue expenditure is 1250, as we have seen here, right? So revenue expenditure 1250 and revenue receipt is 1000. So 1250 minus 1000, that will make it simply 250. Then it says a fiscal deficit. So, what is fiscal deficit essentially? Fiscal deficit is the total expenditure that the government is undertaking minus all the revenues, all the revenues, whether it is on the revenue account, capital account, but not the borrowings, not the borrowings. And if you understand this idea, because it is a balanced budget, that total expenditure and total receipt is equal. If you take the borrowings out, this will be simply equal to the borrowings only. So even though all the information of all other types of breakdown in the receipt side is not given to us, that how much of it is or based on what factors, that how much actually all the breakdown, but borrowing is given to us. So even from this we can directly say that my fiscal deficit is going to be equal to the borrowings. So I'm sure you otherwise also you may have remembered that fiscal deficit is same as borrowings. So that will be 350. And the last one says primary deficit. Primary deficit is essentially the obligation, the fiscal deficit that is there only for the current government, only for the current year, not from the previous years. So, how is primary deficit defined? This is the fiscal deficit, which we have already calculated at D, fiscal deficit minus the interest payments that we are making this year, because they actually belong to the previous year's loans, etc. So, fiscal deficit minus interest. Interest is 150, and we calculated fiscal deficit as 350. So 350 minus 150, that makes it 200. So that should be the calculation. And that is all for this video. And in case you're wondering and you still don't know what the various terms on the first screen were, here is the explanation of these various corns. And that was the decacorn that we have seen. I hope you have not forgotten. So keep working hard and have fun. All the best.